8,000 cans of beefaroni, baby. Let's go.
Yeah.
Ash and Zach are super smart. They went to college and learned a bunch of stuff. And Bo and Andrew didn't go to college and were able to sidestep mountains of unnecessary debt. What happens when you put them together and you try to make them learn? Well, grab your friends. Let's listen together on Get Dumped On, an info dump podcast. Hello and welcome to Get Dumped On, an Infodump podcast. This is the podcast where we learn more about the world and each other through exploration of whatever random niche interest topic is occupying our mind at the moment. I am joined here today by a regular cast of characters. I got Andrew over there.
Hello, I'm over here.
That's Andrew over there. And then on the other side over there, that's Bo.
Hey, I'm on this side. Hey.
Oh my gosh, over there. I'm Ash. Did I say that already? If I did, well, I'm saying it twice. Today, I'm super excited. Zach has been putting in a lot of research and effort into this podcast. There's been many times where he's like, oh gosh, I want to tell you about this specific thing, but like, I want you to hear it. So I'm super excited for Zach to dump on us today. What do you got, Zach?
Hey, it's me. I'm Zach. What do you guys know about the Northwest Passage?
Well, we've done 2 episodes roughly about it, right?
It's
Which 2
somewhere
episodes?
north, not that much north, but slightly west. Yeah.
The ghost ship one, right?
Oh, yeah, I guess, yeah. I'm trying to remember. The ghost ship was from the 22 Strange but True Stories, right?
But also was referenced in a different episode as well.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I know that I made quick reference to the topic of this episode in the Ice Mummies when I was forced to go through the remainder of my notes as quickly as possible. But it's something that's been sticking in my head ever since we did that. And so I wanted to give it its fair due and devote an entire episode to that sort of subject matter, expand the story a little bit, because there's a lot to be expanded. The inspiration for this also came from a few weeks ago. My Spotify recommended me the song Northwest Passage by Stan Rogers and covered by Unleash the Archers, which is a really great song. It made me cry a little bit. And so I wanted to get back into kind of reading about the 1845 Franklin expedition to the Northwest Passage.
And so the Northwest Passage is a sea passage from the Atlantic to the Pacific that goes above North America, right?
Yes, that's exactly what it is. I've got some stuff here to kind of go over why it was so important, but set the scene.
Can I guess?
Sure.
Wasn't it important because like no one knew where it was and they were like trying to find it?
Did it even exist?
Yeah, exactly. So, say my catchphrase again. But basically, England was really invested in trade and colonization of the Orient, of Eastern Asia, the Indian subcontinent, that whole region. And to get there, depending on which part of it you're going to, they had to go from England all the way south down the Atlantic Sea and then around either South America or Africa, which really greatly extended the amount of time that it took to get there. Oversea, they could go over land, but that would be even
just
harder.
To go over land? Yeah.
And it would be even harder to go over land. It takes a lot more time. You need a lot more supplies.
Oh.
And you wouldn't be able to. So, like, if you want to bring a really big load of cargo there, if you want, if you want to take a big load of cargo there,
Zach,
you could either.
Zach.
Yeah.
Did you just say load?
I did say load.
Oh. Carry on.
If you wanted to take that sort of, cargo over land, you would need a big caravan of wagons and things to pull those wagons and porters and people and everything like that. Or you could have one ship that you load the hell out of and crew with, 50 to 100 sailors. And so it's a lot cheaper to send ships overseas. What they always really wanted, though, was a more direct route. And with the discovery of the New World, and especially more mapping of Canada, that began to theorize that there was a Northwest Passage that would go above Canada and come out into the Pacific and be a more direct route to the eastern half of Asia. There was a lot of sort of economic reasons to find it. There was also a lot of political reasons to find it because they were kind of competing with Spanish and Portuguese sailors to find it first, to lay claims to it, and also have the glory of finding and exploring this new region. So set the scene. It's April 1805. Napoleon is master of Europe. Only the British fleet stands before him. Oceans are now battlefields.
Oh.
And that's the Napoleonic Wars. That's just the opening crawl to the movie Master and Commander. I just wanted to work it in because once the Napoleonic Wars ended in 1815, when Napoleon got spanked at Waterloo, the British had a lot of ships and a lot of men that they needed to occupy. They had a lot of ships that needed to be used, and they had a lot of young officers which were looking for assignments and glory. And one of the ways that they would occupy these officers and give them some way to advance, some way to become career officers, that was exploration.
So he had big loads of semen, I see.
Big loads of semen.
Okay.
So they're like, you want to learn some shit? Leave.
Yeah, pretty much.
You got a boat, don't you?
Claim something new for the glory of England. And at this point, the main areas which were unexplored were the polar regions, the Arctic and the Antarctic. They decided that this was the time to spend a lot of resources towards finding the Northwest Passage and mapping the area above Canada, because Canada was British still at the time. Though there is the whole war by the War of 1812. It's a whole thing. So there's a man named Sir John Barrow, who was the second secretary of the British Admiralty, who became he became the main guy who was really pushing for this. The finding the Northwest Passage was his goal as a member of the Admiralty. And he was in charge of pretty much all the expeditions to find it. And so these expeditions penetrated into Canada by varying degrees and usually had to turn back because they ran out of food, or they all got scurvy, or they suffered from this sort of vague illness they couldn't define that they called debility.
I love old-timey illnesses.
Let's go ahead and guess what that is.
What do you think debility is?
What's debility?
Stability? It's like...
No,
man.
debility.
Oh, okay.
Debility.
Okay, I'll clarify. Debility, hey, so it has to do with the toes not bending. You can't bend your toes no more. So they're always
that's exactly
straight. And it's like you try, but you can't because they don't have the ability to do it no more.
One would think that that wouldn't affect your life at all, and it's true. It's just you can't bend them, and it's really annoying.
Could you imagine right now? You're staring at your toes, and you can't bend them, and it's just like,
you're like, wow,
sucks.
that's weird. I can still walk and do everything I need to, but I just can't bend these things.
Damn this illness. Damn this illness.
It'd be really hard to walk if your toes didn't move.
Yeah, it would be really
if they
hard.
were stuck, if you just couldn't feel them, I think you could probably deal with it. But if they were stuck, unable to move, they were rigid, I feel like that'd be really hard to walk.
I'm going to try it right now. Hold on. It's fine.
I seriously doubt it. My guess is that
stand up
for
right now.
debility, you just are debilitated.
It's like you're just walking like a duck, essentially, but it's it's fine. You can still do it.
My guess for debility is that you just can't do stuff. You just get real tired and
I mean, that's
waste
basically
away, wasting disease.
Yeah. So the debility, as they described it, was essentially, wasting away, not being able to work, fatigue, malaise, that sort of thing. A malaise of the spirit and the body.
That's a depression.
Well, I mean, kind of, yeah. Just a general feeling of debilitation, which is, I guess, where the name comes from, debility. Not being able to do anything.
They're also sad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The main thing that these expeditions relied on, and part of the reason why they started making these really long exploration journeys, is that tinned food had pretty recently been invented. Cans of meat and soups were able to be loaded into the holds of the ships, so they were theoretically able to have fresh food throughout their entire journey.
Pretty sick. Cannon stuff's pretty cool.
The Admiralty was very big proponents of this because at this point, the cause of scurvy was still not entirely known. They knew that lemon and citrus would help, but they weren't exactly sure why it helped. They just knew that citrus helped, and that other expeditions which were able to get a lot of fresh food along the way were able to stave off scurvy. So remember when we were talking in the Antarctica episode, Shackleton's crew didn't get a lot of scurvy because they were able to eat fresh penguin meat pretty much the whole time. They didn't bring canned food with them, but did they? I don't remember, but they were still able to stave off the scurvy because of this.
Big fan of not getting scurvy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Scurvy is staved off by
It's vitamin C.
lemons
So
and
scurvy
vitamin C and that stuff.
Scurvy is caused when your body has a lack of vitamin C. The main thing that it does is it causes your connective tissue to break down. And so
Sweet.
the first...
I was being facetious. That's not sweet.
Oh, I thought you said wait.
Oh, no, I said sweet.
Okay, I thought you said wait. So I stopped. I thought you had a problem with your file or something.
Speaking of scurvy, I just popped open a Liquid Death Squeeze to Death orange flavor one. So I'm going to stave off some scurvy right now. Not a sponsor. They should be. This is the second time we've referenced them.
So scurvy causes the connective tissue in your body to break down. The first sign of it is your gums turning black. Your teeth will fall out. Your scars will all open up.
I hate everything that you just said.
Yeah.
Every single thing that came out of your mouth was just awful.
And if it progresses to the end stage, usually what happens is your heart will just kind of fall apart.
Sweet.
Particularly at where the arteries come out of it.
Oh, that's bad.
Some particular notable explorers of this era from 1815 onwards were John Ross and his nephew James Clark Ross, who sometimes were on the same expeditions, and other times it was James Clark Ross kind of doing his own thing. They also were mentioned in the Antarctic episode because these guys were just going all over these poles doing their explorations.
They're just rossing it up.
Yeah, rossing it up. Frederick William Beattie, who went in pretty far and named an island after himself. That'll play a role later on. And William Edward Parry, who had an expedition 1819 to 1820, which was probably the most successful of this era. And later on, he would hold the record of furthest north person for 50 years, which is pretty cool.
How did they know that? Or was it within their own ranks?
No,
like, how did they know? Yeah, nobody else was able to prove that they had gone that far north. I mean, a big part of sailing is knowing exactly where you
They
are.
didn't have the internet back then. Some guy from Sweden is up there in like a tugboat, or I don't know.
Yeah, but if they got all the way north, they'd probably know about it. The Arctic Sea it's not easy.
Like, I'm in Nord.
It's not easy to go to, and if you made it pretty far north, you'd probably know or want to tell somebody about it, because a big part of sailing is knowing where you are. There's a lot of methods to figure that out, ranging
and telling everyone about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Guess where I was? It's like, no.
So by 1845, the entrances to the passage on both the Atlantic and Pacific sides had been largely mapped and figured out. This part of the sea, it's a cluster, it's a tangle of islands. So what was left was pretty much the middle. Nobody had been able to figure out where they connect, and everyone had to turn around before they were able to go far enough in to figure it out.
So is this him going straight north, like over the top, tippy top, and then like dropping back down?
So it's tough to visualize without a map, but essentially from England, they sailed to Greenland. Then you'd go around the southern edge of Greenland. You'd kind of curve around that, and then it's all frozen
Pop out, like,
if you go up further
the top
north.
part of Canada, right?
Yeah, so then they go west into Baffin Bay, which is in the top part of Canada, and then the Lancaster Strait is kind of the entrance into this Northwest Passage area. And from there, you get into this big tangle and cluster of islands.
You know, when you look at a map of North America and the top of Canada looks like it's floating away? No one else? Okay, cool.
No, sorry. I thought you were going to finish your sentence.
That's the area that it is.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't know if they were trying to go straight up from England and then drop down into Canada, or if it was we're going to go over here first and then try sort of thing. Because I feel like, why didn't they just go up from England?
Maps.
If you go up from England, you hit the straight North Pole, and it's really difficult to go like straight, right? Because it's like
it's
icy as fuck.
Extraordinarily frozen.
Okay.
Really,
and so
really
you
cool.
gotta go west.
I'm not trying to boat splain these guys, but you know.
And so they did go north up to Greenland, and then they went west.
Yeah, I don't know how to find a map of it that doesn't already have the route that I'm talking like marked out that would explain it.
No, you're good. You're good.
Okay.
You go.
Okay. All in all, there's about 1,000 square miles that would be able to connect the east and west sides of the passage that somebody needed to sail into and chart and figure out what the hell was going on. Now, at this point in 1845, John Barrow was in his 80s and he was reaching retirement. And what he really wanted was to be able to cap off his career and put this Northwest Passage on his hat.
Did you say he was in his 80s?
Yes.
Damn.
I mean, he was just the one ordering everyone around. He wasn't actually doing the exploration himself.
Oh, okay.
And so he wanted to basically throw everything that he could muster into one last grand voyage that would close the gap and chart the Northwest Passage. And the first thing was to pick somebody who would command the voyage. His first choice was William Parry, but at this point he was also old and he was tired of being in the Arctic. Then he said, hey, James Clark Ross, you're a pretty hot shit. Do you want to come and do this? And he was like, I just got back and I promised my wife that I would settle down at home. So he was going to be a wife guy.
I need to take out the garbage.
Yeah.
No, thank you.
Then they picked a guy named James Fitzjames, but he was rejected by the Admiralty for being too young.
What a name.
Yeah, right? Double James. It's like a Jean Valjean situation, but the English version.
I wish my name was Beauregard. That would be cool.
That'd be a great name.
Ooh.
Beau de Beau. Ooh, I like Beau de Beau.
Ooh, Beau de Beau. Hey, Mr. Beau de Beau, how you doing?
Beau de Beau de bang a ding ding ding.
Then he suggested Francis Crozier, who had been on Ross's previous expeditions, but he declined out of modesty. And then finally they settled
possibly.
on... finally they settled on...
Was modesty actual modesty or a disease called modesty where they couldn't accept anything?
All I have is that it says he declined out of modesty. Didn't work out well for him, though. We'll talk about it in a second. And then it finally settled on Sir John Franklin. Now, Franklin was an okay choice. It's kind of obvious why he would be the fifth choice? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, the fifth choice. He had an early reputation for dandiness, being a bit of a soft-handed man.
Dandiness?
Dandiness.
Are you calling him?
Well, it says, Lieutenant Franklin, the officer who commands the party, has not the physical powers required for the labor of moderate voyaging in this country. He must have 3 meals per diem. Tea is indispensable. And with the utmost exertion, he cannot walk above 8 miles in one day, so that it does not follow, if those gentlemen are unsuccessful, that the difficulties are insurmountable.
They're calling him soft.
They're calling him soft. This was written.
Yeah. Like, this guy needs to eat food.
Yeah, no, this was written about him in 1819. So this was like at the beginning of this guy's career.
Dandy is like would be like a metrosexual. Like you're really into your style. Like you have soft hands.
No, self-care is important, and this is the first guy who figured it out.
Where he's like, listen, if I'm gonna be on a ship for that long, I at least need some fucking tea every day.
You walk 8 miles. No, I have a boat. I'll fucking sail.
That's why I got into sailing.
I forgot to mention at the beginning of the episode that my main source for this is a book that I read called Frozen in Time by Owen, Beattie, and John Geiger. And I also watched 3 documentaries, 2 from Nova that I'll look up the names of, and one that was on the History Channel in 2002. The Nova one, Buried in Ice, was a PBS one. It was really worth watching, even though it's from 1988. I'll go into why it's good, but also it's narrated by the guy who narrates Forensic Files, which is great.
Great show.
More recent Nova one is from 2016. I'll talk about that at the end of the episode. But when I'm reading quotes, most of them are going to be as quoted in this Frozen in Time book. And then I'll list the sources in the episode description. So,
What?
What?
Okay, so I'm making sure it's not me. Okay.
Zach, we can't hear you.
It sounded like he exploded.
Zach, we can't hear you.
Like
it's happening again.
My microphone just muted itself. It's back now. It's back now. I figured it out.
It's like you're about to drop like important information. You got like assassinated. The real killer is.
So,
the Northwest Passage was finally found by.
That microphone doesn't have a mute function. No,
it's muting in Windows. I don't understand. And my headset does a little beep, and then Windows mutes the microphone, which is weird because I'm not using the headset microphone. So I don't know what's going on. But it's back now.
I'm leaving this all in here, by the way.
This was written about him before he was selected to be in an 1819 to 1822 expedition to the Arctic, which ended up being actually pretty successful, sort of. And then he went again on an 1825 to 1827 expedition. It was successful in the fact that between these two missions, he mapped about 600 miles of the Arctic coastline. It was less successful in that 10 men starved, and he became known as the man who ate his own boots.
Okay. Well, but he was drinking tea the whole way, though. So
He was drinking tea out of his boots.
Soften him up,
boot tea. You steep your boot leather and water.
Where else would he drink the tea from?
People add honey. He adds boots. What's so difficult about this?
What? I don't know. Eating a shoe seems like it'd be bad for you.
Yeah, well, it's leather, so especially back in the day, they made their shoes out of all natural materials.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah, it helped with scurvy. And what was that? Debility.
Debility.
Yeah.
His toes can bend as far as the eye can see.
Yeah, it's
Almost
thanks to
too
the
far.
boots. It's the osmosis from the boots. By the time that he was chosen in 1815, he was just returning to England from a position where he was the governor of Van Diemen's Land for the past 6 years. Which
What
is a
the
weird
fuck
way
is
for me
that?
a weird way for me to organize that sentence. But Van Diemen's Land is what they call what it's now called Tasmania.
Pause. Is that Barnaby meowing in the background?
Yeah.
Okay, I thought
Hey,
so.
remember last time when your microphone failed, you blamed it on Barnaby?
Mm-hmm.
And now it turns out it was a Windows issue.
Yeah.
So I would like you to live apologize to your cat before we move on.
Barnaby, I'm sorry for blaming you for the microphone. It's just that usually when something goes wrong, it's your fault.
Oh, but I forgot. Isn't he? He's a good boy.
Yes,
Such a
he's
good
amazing.
boy.
Oh, what I've
He's
been
such a good boy.
Okay.
He's such a good boy. He's the best
He's
boy.
such a good boy. It's not his fault that he doesn't know how things work. He just has a tiny little cat brain.
Okay. Yeah, continue.
Mhm.
Continue. Just wanted to call attention to the menace cat. That's all.
By 1845, so he was just spent the previous 6 years as governor of Van Diemen's Land, which is now called Tasmania, little island off the coast of Australia. The English used it as a prison colony. That's a whole thing. We'll talk about it later in a future episode. It's a cool subject for an episode. And at this point, he was 59 years old, and he was willing to go because he wanted some sort of last attempt at real glory and adventure. And it's important to note here that by all accounts, he was, he may have been a little bit dandy in his previous life, but he was a guy that you wanted around. He was, morally speaking, the right guy for the job. He was friendly and easygoing. He was described as the rare sort of genuinely good person that you want around. And so that's nice. They picked 2 ships for the expedition, which were pretty similar ships, the HMS Erebus and the HMS Terror.
Oh, man. The HMS Terror is such a good name.
Those sound familiar.
Yep. The Erebus and the Terror had both recently returned from James Clark Ross's last expedition to the Arctic, which was their 3rd. They had also been to Antarctica, which is also cool. And yeah, the Terror is a great name for a ship. My main knowledge of the Franklin expedition before doing all this research for this episode was a book called The Terror, which is based on the expedition, but also extremely fictionalized to the point where they added like a monster. And we're like, this monster killed everybody. And they turned it into a TV show a couple of years back, which is probably why it sounds familiar. I haven't watched the TV show, but maybe I will. I always wanted to, but I never did because I liked the book. But if you do read the book, pirate it because the author's a piece of shit. Anyway, the Erebus and the Terror were 100-foot long, more or less. They were naval bombardment ships, and they were originally intended to bomb targets on shore. And they were really sturdily built because they had to withstand that recoil. And a fun fact about the Terror is that it was actually one of the ships that was bombarding Fort McHenry during the War of 1812. Does that ring a bell?
No.
The Francis Scott Key, does that ring a bell? Was that
Oh my
Fort
gosh,
McHenry?
the bombs bursting in air?
Yeah, so the bombs bursting in air, the part of the Star Spangled Banner.
To the light, through the night? I don't know.
Yeah, so the Terror was one of the ships that was bombarding Fort McHenry and responsible for the writing of the Star Spangled Banner, our national anthem.
Look, I only know things that we talk about from this podcast, which you talked about the Terror before a couple times.
It's a pretty cool ship.
It's done a lot of shit.
Yeah, it's done a lot of nonsense. Pretty hardcore. The Erebus and the Terror were kind of fixed up and renovated a little bit for the journey. They both had 8-foot oak hulls, which had extra iron plating installed. They added a steam engine, which could heat the insides of the ships.
Oh, hell yeah.
Which is very important to have. They put a desalinator in the galley so that they could get drinking water from the sea and
that's cool.
take the salt out. And then they actually installed entire steam locomotives in each ship to drive experimental retractable propellers in case of emergency, which is pretty cool.
Oh.
Franklin was made captain of the Erebus, so the Erebus would be the main ship in the expedition. And then they got Fitzjames to be the second in command. And then the Terror was given command to Francis Crozier. So both of these people who declined to be the captains ended up coming along anyway. Franklin, because of his previous experience eating his own boots, didn't want to go hungry. England didn't want to go hungry either. And so they were stocked with massive amounts of food, enough to last them 3 years. They were expected to get stuck at least one winter. That was kind of pretty normal for Arctic expeditions. I mean, you're going up to the Arctic. Of course, you're going to get frozen in the ice during the winter. And then, add another year just in case. So as we said, the tinned food was got to have that buffer.
Any good plan has a hefty amount of buffer.
So the tinned food was a pretty new invention and had been tested on a few previous Arctic expeditions, like we talked about, believed to have I also found out from my research that anti-scorbutic is the word that means it prevents scurvy. So
say it again.
To have anti-scorbutic.
Oh.
What kind of food would you bring in canned food? What if you could bring 8,000 cans of food? What would you have them be?
Boy, R.
Yeah, just 8,000 cans of beefaroni, baby. Let's go.
I was going to say Spam, but Chef Boyardee is a better answer.
I mean, yeah, like you can get canned. You can have such a wide variety. You can can so many things.
Yeah. They ended up bringing boiled and roast beef, boiled and roast mutton, veal, seasoned beef, and ox cheek, potatoes, parsnips, carrots, mixed vegetables, soups of 1, 2, 4, 6, and 8 pound capacity.
Oh man, dude! After a long day on the water, it's cold. Like you're wet. You come in the heated cabin. You got a nice bowl of warm soup. It's not too bad.
Yeah, not too bad. And 1,203 pounds of tinned pemmican. Then in addition,
classic
they brought
Oregon Trail food.
Yeah, classic Oregon Trail food. Pemmican is it's
what is that?
It's not jerky, but it's kind of like jerky.
It's not quite.
It's better than jerky.
It's not jerky. Oh
yeah,
that did not help explain.
Pemmican it's a mixture of like animal fat, like I think it's lard or tallow meat, dried meat, like so tallow, jerky, and berries, and it's like super calorie rich. It's like shelf stable. It's originally made by indigenous peoples in different parts of North America. I'm not specifically sure where pemmican came about. I think
the Plains people, I'm pretty sure.
Ah, that makes sense. Yeah, so it's like it's kind of like a dope like little protein bar, but it's like berries and dried meat and like animal fat, tallow. I just looked it up.
So it's jerky, but not jerky.
Yeah, so it's jerky, but not
beefed
jerky.
up jerky. It's jerky with like added fat and protein.
Yeah. Then they also brought 7,088 pounds of tobacco, because you can't have a bunch of English people in the 1840s without.
I mean, you gotta have something
3.5 tons of tobacco. 200 gallons of quote unquote wine for the sick. 9,450 pounds of chocolate for energy.
Wine for the sick.
9,300 pounds of lemon juice. Now, what else would you have brought? You think that's good? You want to bring anything else?
Whiskey for the sick too.
Oh, yeah. Keeps you warm. Some bourbon, some brandy.
A guitar.
DoorDash.
Oh, yeah. Well,
playing cards.
So in addition to all of this food, the Erebus had a 1,700 volume library and the Terror a 1,200 volume library of reference and entertainment material. So previous Arctic journals, then also like a Bible, a few issues of like the entertainment magazines of the time. They had a hand organ, writing desks, research instruments, and they were one of the first expeditions to include that newfangled invention, a camera. Sealskin gloves, sealskin caps, and sealskin coats, and deerskin trousers for each man. So basically what I'm trying to get at here is that it was really well supplied. They
were well stocked.
They had pretty much everything. They were cramped on the ships, especially because the expedition left with a total of 134 officers and men, most of whom were convinced to join by the promise of double pay and, of course, the eternal glory for Her Majesty. And then there was also a dog named Neptune and a monkey named Jacko.
What?
Yeah, There's a
I have
monkey
two
on the
questions.
ship's like.
I have two questions.
There's a monkey. I don't know what kind of monkey. I'm sorry.
That's upsetting. What kind of dog?
I also don't know what kind of dog.
It sounds like a Nickelodeon cartoon.
Right?
Right. It really does.
Why? Why?
Why to the monkey
Well,
or the dog or both?
both.
Oh, and there's also it's not listed on the ship's register, but there is probably a cat too.
I mean, you gotta have a cat.
Yeah, because they would always have ship's cats for luck and also to eat all the rats.
It's
Or-
in the cartoon, the cat's the annoyed neighbor in this scenario. they fucking go. There they go again. Stupid dog and that ridiculous monkey.
Why would you want a monkey? I don't know why you would want that.
I mean, you see pirates, they always have monkeys.
Yeah, but
I'm sure it was somebody's like favorite monkey. I mean, it has a name. It's Jacko. You wouldn't bring Jacko with you?
no, don't keep monkeys.
I bet they'd have a good time climbing around all the rigging.
That's true.
So at least they'd be occupied enough that they wouldn't piss all over everything. I mean, they'd
They
still
still
be pissing
would.
all over everything, but at least they might not bite you. Maybe. Onward. So the ships departed May 19th, 1845, with everyone super stoked, in high spirits, very confident, ready to party. They sailed west with a stop in the Orkney Islands, north of Scotland. I have a friend who's from there. It's pretty cool. We haven't talked in a while, but I'm sure she's chill. They were joined by a transport vessel that had livestock on it, who sailed with them until they got to Disco Bay on the west coast of Greenland. I don't know why it's called Disco Bay. It's called Disco Bay with a K, which is interesting. I could not find why it's called Disco Bay, but granted, I was busy writing everything else. I didn't really look it up. So if you want to look it up right now, go ahead. And when they got to Disco Bay, the livestock was slaughtered for a last top off of fresh meat. Then, with the people on that transport ship, they sent home some letters and diaries that detailed this leg of the journey, where everyone has very happy and confident things to say. Everyone has very nice things to say about Franklin, but they did also bring home 5 men who had gotten tuberculosis over the journey. Then on July 12th, they pushed westward. They met 2 whaling ships, the Prince of Wales and the Enterprise, stopped
The
for
Prince
a chat.
of Wales whaling ship. That's
Right.
funny.
They stopped for a chat and they were going to go over for dinner, but then the ships got blown apart and they weren't able to. And that was the last time anyone saw them alive.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, that was fun.
That was gonna be a happy story, but
Well, see you next week, guys.
Yeah.
And thanks for listening to the podcast.
So
We're still looking for the passage.
this is where all the interesting stuff really kicks in. So this is now
The answer
kind of-
to the Disco Bay question
Mhm.
is they don't really know. It's probably some bastardization of what was once the Dutch called it, maybe. But it's
classic. Classic.
just kind of its name.
I love that. So now the story becomes not. Now the story becomes, hey, what happened to the Franklin expedition? And it's a story.
They had
that's
everything going for
captivated-
them.
Yeah, they had everything going for them. It's a story that has captivated people for 150 years now at this point. People have written songs about it. It's one of the great stories of Canadian history. A lot of documentaries, TV shows, stuff like that. So let's talk about now how did people react to it at the time? And well, as we said, they left with 3 years' supplies. So nobody was really worried about them for very long, for quite a while. It was a little weird that no letters came. And because, sometimes you'll send somebody back with some letters, they'll meet a whaling ship or something. But after about 2 years, they were supposed to have, gotten stuck in for a winter, gone out to the other side, made it to Alaska and, started back. But there was no letters coming. So Lady Jane Franklin, who was Franklin's wife, and based on the images of her, quite the baddie, she started to get worried. She was really well connected. She had a lot of political connections, a lot of newspaper connections. And she had come from her own money, and then Franklin was rich. They were kind of a rich family. But she started making a big fuss about starting to organize rescue attempts. And she wrote letters to these newspapers and caused a big stink. And eventually, the Admiralty were like, well, we can't let this private citizen lead the search for our officers. So we'll get going on some search parties.
Shame them into action. Good job.
Pretty much. So the first expedition launched in 1848, the first rescue attempt, and this was a 3-pronged plan. There was going to be an overland search led by Sir John Rae, and 2 overseas searches, one which entered from the Pacific and the other which entered from the Atlantic.
Hit him from both sides.
A sort of pincer situation.
Can you remind me what year they left?
1845.
Okay.
Now, the Atlantic expedition was led by James Clark Ross, who I guess probably figured that this was enough of a responsibility that he could break his oath to his wife to stop doing Arctic exploration and go back out. I mean, because I guess it's not really exploration, right? It's a rescue mission, so it's honorable.
Honey,
now.
I'm the only guy for the job. That's probably what he said to his wife.
Probably. Now, this expedition was almost immediately beset by debility. Oops. And he ended up suffering several deaths. The ship was frozen in the ice, but they had expected this and brought large supplies of tinned food. While wintering on the ship, they were like, well, we can't go anywhere because we're stuck in the hummock ice, but we also aren't going anywhere in the ship. But they still wanted to keep the search efforts going. So what would you do?
So they got Shackletoned?
They got Shackletoned.
As they were expecting. It's a thing that happens. Send up flares? I don't really know. Send out littler boats?
Call the search. Call it.
They're dead. Let's just go home after this.
I would do what that guy did on that island when he was, what was it? He did the prank where he lit it on fire.
Light your ship on fire?
I would just light some shit on fire and hopefully somebody comes and finds me.
They're locked in the ice.
When there's smoke,
if you light the fires,
light
it'll
the
melt
ice
the
on
ice.
fire.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
The main thing that they did was they trapped Arctic foxes and they fitted them with copper collars that they had engraved on the name of the ship, their position, and the date. And then they released them back into the wilderness with the hope that they would run across Franklin and his men and tell them where to go.
What the fuck?
I love that. I love that thinking, though. I love it.
What the fuck?
So they Gandalfed it.
Yeah, they Gandalfed it. And I saw...
Because Gandalf, like, he found that moth or whatever it was, and he was like, yo.
Yeah.
Tell the Eagles, bro.
That's pretty much exactly what they did. That's probably where Tolkien got the idea. He was a big history guy.
I don't... Okay, all right.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you're desperate. I did see one... I was a little unclear on which of the rescue expeditions did this, but there's also talk of hot air balloons being involved.
Oh my God.
And then another thing that I do want to note is that while they were wintering, they had these really big wool covers that they covered the deck of the ship with, like a big wool tent that covered the deck and kept the warmth in from the heaters.
That's cool.
And Franklin's probably had these too. It's pretty neat. Then once winter broke and they were able to get to shore, they sent out sledging parties, which Ross led. But about 2 weeks out, the health of his party crashed almost entirely, and they were forced to turn back. They left a letter which detailed their attempt at the place. And I have a note to read a quote from the book. The cylinder which contains this paper was left here by a party detached from Her Majesty's ships Enterprise and Investigator under the command of Captain Sir James C. Ross, Royal Navy, in search of the expedition of Sir John Franklin, having wintered, and to inform any of his party that might find it that these ships, having wintered at Port Leopold, longitude 90 degrees west, latitude 73, 52 degrees north, have formed there a depot with provisions for use of Sir John Franklin's party sufficient for 6 months, and also 2 very small depots about 15 miles south of Cape Clarence and 12 miles south of Cape Seppings. The party are now about to return to the ships, which, as early as possible in the spring, will push forward to Melville Strait and search the north coast of the Barrow Strait. Failing to meet the party they are seeking, will touch at Port Leopold on their way back and then return to England, for the winter shall set in. I guess I didn't really need to read that, but I did put in my notes to do it, so I did it.
They left him some loot caches.
Yep, they left him some loot caches. Having found no sign of the Franklin expedition at this point and thoroughly demoralized from the debility of his party, they left in July to return home, leaving the caches mentioned in the letter with the food, shelters, tools, and a steamboat, actually. 7 men ended up dying during this rescue attempt, and they limped back to England, arriving home in November 1849.
Wow. Way to go, guys.
There were similar stories to the other 2 prongs of the expedition. Nobody ended up finding anything. So in April 1850, the Toronto Globe advertised a £20,000 reward, again doing these newspaper way, to be given by Her Majesty's government, quote, to any party or parties of any country who shall render efficient assistance to the crews of the Discovery ships under the command of Sir John Franklin, with further bounties depending on how far they got in the task.
And so at this point in time, it's been like too long that they would have had food for, right?
Their supplies would have run out sort of mid to late 1850, I think early 1849. Kind of now the hope becomes, I mean, they're hoping that I think they all learned how to survive by eating seals and stuff.
Yeah.
Or they managed to stretch their rations in some way. I mean, that's the thing about when people start dying is that the food that you already have lasts a little bit longer, right? So this led to a new frenzy of rescue attempts. At one point, there were 13 vessels searching simultaneously for the Franklin expedition. And ironically, this led to a new golden age of Arctic exploration with new stuff being found all the time by these rescue ships. That's a topic for a future episode. But one thing I do want to say is, have you heard of the Resolute desk?
Yes.
No.
What is it?
The president's desk?
It's the president's desk. So it's the desk in the Oval Office. And so the Resolute desk is made from wood salvaged from a ship called the Resolute. This was a ship that was actually abandoned during the rescue attempts. And then a few up in the Arctic. And then a few years later, an American ship found it, patched it up, and returned it to England. And when the English used it for 20 years, and then when the ship was decommissioned 20 years later, they made a desk from the timbers, and Queen Victoria gave it to Rutherford B. Hayes as like a, hey, thanks to your country for returning the ship to us kind of thing.
That's so interesting.
Nice. So now, spoiler alert, they never found what they were looking for, i.e. Franklin and his men alive sheltering somewhere. They were also hoping to find a ship's log. It was pretty traditional for ships when they are abandoned or ships while they're making the log to make 2 copies of the log. When the ship is abandoned, the party who's leaving it takes 1 copy with them and then buries or secures the other log somewhere, along with diaries and writings and things like that. And they never found that either. But that was what they were looking for. The first trace of the expedition was found by one of these parties in 1850, though. It was the crew of the HMS Assistance, and it was a small camp on the southwest shore of Devon Island. Devon Island is partway through the passage, and it was just some scattered trash, not really indicative of anything or even a sort of long-term stay, probably just a short stop to take readings and bearings. It didn't really give any indication of their state or their whereabouts, but it was pretty clear that they had stopped here. They had found newspapers from 1844, fragments of paper, food tins, etc.
Man, so this is the only trace of them that anyone has ever seen.
This was the first trace, that anyone had found of them. But then shortly after, they spotted a large cairn of stones. And a lot of this comes down to cairns of stones. People are always leaving behind stacks of stones. It's just a thing that people like doing. Stack up some stones, let people know that you were here. And so there's a nearby island connected to Devon Island, which is called Beattie Island. And so a lot
that's
of
just lazy.
Well, Beattie Island, Beechey, it was named after a person who found it in an earlier expedition.
That's better.
They assembled as like a flotilla on this island, and then people just started scouring it for anything that they could find because they saw the care and they knew that there was going to be something here. And pretty quickly, on August 27th, they found in a line 3 small graves, which were lying side by side. The first one was John Torrington, who died on January 1st, 1846. He was 20 years old. He was the lead stoker, but otherwise not much is known about him, except that he was born in Manchester 20 years earlier. Then John Hartnell, who died on January 4th, 1846, so 3 days later. He was 25. He was an able seaman, which is just kind of like the general crew. He was from a family of shipbuilders. And then William Brain, who died on April 3rd, 1846, and he was 32.
Since you have these specific dates, I imagine they found a ledger.
Oh, no, they had gravestones.
Oh.
So it's 3 small... So
I figured it was just like little bumps in the ground.
No. That's how they knew that it was graves. So each grave had a little stone made of, I think it was shale, some kind of stone that was carved in traditional gravestone style. It had the name of the person, their lifespan, and their age. And the second 2 ones had Bible verses on them.
Wow.
And so picture Beattie Island is a small island. It's all gravel. It's entirely gravel. And underneath that gravel is permafrost. On one shore, near the shore of the island, there are 3 small graves in a row marked by these gravestones. And then the graves themselves are kind of marked by stones in a grave-like shape. Can you picture that in your head?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So they called this the Isthmus of the Graves, because while Beattie Island is called Beattie Island, it's actually an isthmus, but that doesn't matter. And then they set about examining the site and looking for clues nearby. This was a little concerning because this was the first winter. It was like pretty unusual for people to start dying this early in the journey. They hadn't even been gone for a year yet. But this was kind of the first real clue about the expedition. They now knew that they had spent the first winter here at Beattie Island. And Beattie Island, it's not part of the uncharted area that they were getting into yet, but it was still pretty good. They had made pretty good time to make it into Beattie Island by this point. They found structures on the island. They found tenting sites. They found a forge, a storehouse, a carpenter's house, and a gravelly garden where they were growing anemones on the gravel.
Wow.
So they Hey, Bo, real quick, can you say anemone for me?
Anemone.
That's all I wanted to hear. Carry on.
So now they knew that they spent their first winter here. They were setting up, a camp. They were prepared. They knew what they were doing, except for the fact that 3 people died this winter. And then they found a massive pile of food tins filled with gravel, also making a secondary cairn. 600 of them stacked 7 feet high, which was a normal amount, I suppose, for 130 men to go through in a winter. And then at one point, they shot a polar bear, because there's a lot of polar bears in this region.
I have a question.
Like polar bears.
What's the question?
When you're eating the cans at sea, are they just hucking the cans into the ocean when they're done?
Absolutely, they are.
Probably, yeah, 100%.
This is kind of the one of the main
There's no one's been up there.
One of the main things that people will end up tracking them by are these food cans left behind.
We only leave behind our trash, and that's the truth.
Yeah.
But that was back when there was 10 people on the Earth,
There was 130 people on this only expedition, okay?
It wasn't that. There was the only 100 people that have been in that area ever.
Yeah.
So, it wasn't that bad. It's bad, but it's not that bad. It's not as bad as today where they're hucking Garbage Island.
Not a big footprint.
It was just it was the pebble that was kicked that started the avalanche of the ruining of this planet.
Started the butterfly
effect. Yes, it's these guys' fault.
It's all of these dudes
I definitely would have never littered ever if these guys wouldn't have existed.
That's kind of true.
Trendsetters, I would say.
Yeah, the first litterers ever. It's actually kind of decent for archaeologists later on.
No one ever did it before them.
The main thing that archaeologists use to study people in the past is trash, and so
that's what I'm saying.
I hate it when people litter, but also when I was an archaeologist, most of what I studied was litter, so that's kind of funny. So they shot a polar bear at one point. This is actually a big area for polar bears. There's a lot of polar bears here. When scientists came back here later, they were always talking about how they had polar bears that they had to run off. So they shot a polar bear at one point and they killed it. And they noted when they were skinning it that it had a previous bullet wound. That one of the bullets inside was a match for the ones that Franklin's men would have brought, which is kind of hardcore. So you've got proof that they were here, obviously.
That's wild.
They softened it up for him.
Yeah. He was one shot. He's one shot.
Jesus.
And then ultimately a couple of hundred seamen over these 13 ships just scoured the island looking for everything that they could and turned it all topsy-turvy, which actually led to this being a really rough area for subsequent investigations. They had a much harder time finding anything because everything had just been scattered around the island. After this, they didn't find anything else. They fell into the pattern that we've already kind of seen of scurvy and debility, and they limped back to England. And England stopped sending rescue missions after 1852. Well, the English government stopped sending rescue missions.
They tried.
Yeah, they tried. The next one was from Sir John Ray. He went on an overland rescue attempt in 1854, and this was now the kind of the point where, oh no. Sorry, I erred in my notes. Cut out the part where I said 1852. This is the last one that England sent.
Leave it live.
Sir John Ray led an overland rescue attempt in 1854, but this one actually led to good progress because he actually made the effort to track down and find Inuit people and ask them what they knew about the situation, because it was pretty.
Did you see some dudes out there? Big boat, lots of them.
Yeah, because this Northwest Passage situation is kind of a classic situation where the English are coming in and saying that they're discovering things in a place where people already live. The Inuit live all over this area. It's not easy for them, but they do it. So Sir John Ray actually decided to talk to some of them and treat them like people, because yeah, you assumed that the Franklin expedition would have had some encounters with them. Now, the Inuit, they have a very strong tradition of oral history, and it's really reliable. It's really important to them to keep these stories and hand them down. They don't have a writing system, or at least they didn't at this time, and they were really reliant on their kind of oral histories. And it was important that they stay reliable, because a story about the location of a food source would be the difference between life and death, especially in an environment like the Arctic. So he found multiple sightings of expedition survivors, which were passed down to these search parties. Somebody a few years later, who was also doing the same encounter, like the same method, heard a story where they encountered a group of them, and one man went forward and said the Inuit word for friend and asked for food. And they had some seal meat and gave him a little bit, but they didn't share more, because then they wouldn't have had enough for themselves. And at this point, they were dragging the ship's boats behind them, converted to sledges. They had sleds underneath them and filled with their supplies.
That's fucking cool shit.
Imagine how hard that would be.
That sounds so hard. And you said they had like so much stuff in them. I mean, they probably purged everything they didn't need at that point, but like you said, they were 8-inch thick with extra steel.
Oh, these were the boats, not the ships. These were the boats.
Duh.
Not the ships. And this kind of fits with on Beattie Island, they did find deep ruts in the gravel of people dragging these sledges behind them. But what Sir John Ray ended up finding were a few artifacts of the expedition that he had purchased from the Inuit, that they had like salvaged from some of the stuff that he had left behind. But the main thing that he brought back was a story that he published in a letter to the newspaper. The Inuit told him that they discovered about 30 corpses scattered around a camp, some out in the open, others under tents or boats, and bare bones scattered around. And so the big report that he came back to England with was that the Franklin expedition had ended and everyone who was left starving to death, with their last days spent cannibalizing each other.
Sweet.
It always comes to that.
Yeah. Quote from the letter: "From the mutilated state of many of the corpses and the contents of the kettles, it is evident that our wretched countrymen had been driven to the last resource, cannibalism, as a means for prolonging existence."
The stuff in the kettles.
Yeah.
Their teeth
human
in
bones
there?
and stuff.
Yeah.
Why teeth? Why would you say teeth?
Because like
Teeth
you can't eat teeth, but maybe if you make like tea out of them,
teeth.
Yeah, maybe there's something in there.
One of the other things that they said that they saw was like knee-high leather boots that had boiled meat inside them, which is also gross.
Look, okay, if I'm going to eat you guys, I'm going to respect you by also making a nice bouillabaisse out of your bones.
I mean,
use every inch.
Just because you have to eat your countrymen doesn't mean you can't enjoy it, right?
Yeah, make it taste good.
So this led to a huge outrage in Victorian society. The idea that the English heroes would resort to eating each other, the most base of sins, it was heinous. And it was just this huge, like some people were like, they didn't find that, they killed them, and then they said that they found them killing themselves. But we'll talk about that a little bit more.
I doubt that severely.
Yeah. So now after this, England became involved in the Crimean War, and they no longer could allocate the necessary resources for these rescue attempts, especially because at this point, it's 9 years after they left. Everyone was assumed that they were dead. So they were like, what's the point? But Lady Jane Franklin never gave up the search, and she started funding search attempts with her own money, especially because now she had an extra extra motivation, because she wanted to disprove the idea that her poor dead husband was a cannibal, or at least get some sort of vindication about the fact. She just wanted to know what happened. Can you imagine just, not knowing what happened to your husband and then hearing allegations that he did cannibalism? She started funding rescue attempts from her own money. And the first one, there were two major ones. The first one was led by a guy named Captain Francis Leopold McClintock, which is also a great name, who had participated in some of the previous searches, and Lieutenant William Robert Hobson as his second in command. They left Aberdeen, Scotland in 1857. As is customary, they got stuck in the ice their first winter. They reached Beattie Island in August 1858, then established a winter base around there. And then once they were able to, they started investigating an island nearby called King William Island. And this was where they ended up finding most of the stuff. On the way to King William Island, they encountered 2 Inuit families. They traded for Franklin relics, and they heard from them a story about seeing 2 ships off the shore many years ago. One sank in the deep water, and the other drifted to shore. On board, they found a dead man, a very large dead man, with long teeth.
Very large?
Yeah, a large dead guy with long teeth.
With long teeth? Did his teeth keep growing? What the hell?
Well, it's probably scurvy makes your gums recede.
Oh.
That checks out.
Mm-hmm. And then later on, they met a group of Inuit who told them about a group of white men on a voyage to the Great River, and many of them dropped while walking, and some were buried, and some were not.
They were dropping like flies.
Yeah. Then on May 5th, Hobson's group found the real game changer, probably the most significant thing that had been found or will be found. A note buried in a cairn of stones on the northwest of King William Island, a place that was ironically called Victory Point from a previous expedition. And it was a standard form letter for the English Navy with text spaces to fill in the date and location, and like a little printed part that says, whoever finds this should return it to the English Navy in multiple languages. And around the sides of the first in the blank area, there was a note scrawled in it that revealed the story, and that was written in 1847. And then it had been retrieved, and a second note written in 1848. So the first message details that this was their second winter, which was it was written during their second winter, which was spent at King William Island. And they said it was all well, and said it was May 28th, 1847. Now, I mean, they say all well, but 3 guys died last year. Kind of rude.
Pretty good.
You know, in front of the numbers,
it's well. It's not good. It's well.
It's fine. It's fine.
And how
they sucked anyway. They were dumb.
How
nobody liked them.
far was this point from like where they knew they had been originally?
Reasonably far.
Okay. All right. So yeah.
I don't have an exact mileage, but it's pretty decently far. And then, so that was in 1847. And then the second note was they had retrieved the paper, written a second note, April 25th, 1848, which was signed by James Fitzjames, and reveals that things really took a turn kind of in between these 2 letters. So the ships had been stuck in the ice since September 12th, 1846. John Franklin himself died on June 11th, 1847, and an additional 9 officers and 15 sailors had also died since the last note.
Oh my
Jesus.
They were leaving this as their record that they had abandoned the ships, and that the 105 remaining souls, led by Francis Crozier, were setting off on foot for Back's Fish River, which was the great river mentioned by the Inuit later. This probably
they were dragging the other ones.
So they were dragging the boats, the 2 ships' boats. They were dragging them along on sledges. And the Back's River, if they brought the boats to the river, they would have been able to take the river to a journey to a Hudson's Bay Company trading post. So that was their plan. It was about 1,200 miles overland. Well, it was like 200. It was less of a distance to the river itself. But it was going to be a long way to go. It was a very long distance to go overland, but it was really their only hope. So they had spent a year and 7 months frozen in the ice.
Wow.
Holy
at
shit.
King William Island.
Jeez.
Were they okay?
Was that just a particularly bad, cold year?
Yes.
Like they should have not been stuck that long.
They would not be stuck that long. They would have been stuck and it would have been bad. But ice cores that have been studied, by modern scientists doing climate studies have determined that they were kind of right at the beginning of a 30-year period that was pretty much the worst time that they could have gone.
That's rough.
Of the last 700 years, this was the worst 30 years that they could have done it.
Oh, wow.
So that's bad. And there's just something so fucking eerie about this note. It's just scary that just the thought that they would come back, they came back to the note to update it. I don't know. It creeps me out. It's it's creepy and it's sad.
Yeah.
And but moving on, McClintock and Hobson kept going. And did I say that ironically this was found at Victory Point?
Yeah, you did.
Okay. A few weeks later, they found a skeleton.
A weird victory for the rescue attempt, but not so much for them.
It was named Victory Point because it was at that point the furthest that somebody had made it into the passage before they had to turn back. So a few weeks later, they found a skeleton, which was still in the uniform of one of the expedition's stewards on a gravel ridge near the mouth of a river. And they found some notebooks nearby with song lyrics and poetry and a reference to Terror Camp. They found a field hospital, which was left behind. And they found a lifeboat with 2 skeletons inside. One of which had been torn apart by wolves or bears or what have you. But the other one was untouched. It was tightly wrapped in furs. And there were 2 loaded double-barreled guns within reach. This is like an environmental storytelling tableau like you'd find in a Bethesda game. Right?
I've been thinking that this whole time.
So the boat was on a sledge, and it was loaded and stocked with goods for the ascent of the back river that it never made it to. But they had a lot of unnecessary crap on the boat. There was the combined weight. The combined weight of the boat, the sledge, and the supplies was 1,400 pounds. I don't know how they expected to pull this. There were silk handkerchiefs, there's curtain rods, silverware, scented soaps, sponges, slippers, toothbrushes, hair combs, and 6 books. And the only provisions that were on the boat were tea and chocolate. Huh. The only reason that I can think that they would bring all this stuff is because they would think that maybe they would have to trade it for food if they met Inuit along the way, or the Hudson Bay Company guys when they got to them.
Uh-huh.
And then the other weird thing about it was that the boat was pointed towards where the ships would have been. So then the mystery becomes, had they broken off from the group and were dragging this boat back to the ship to restock their food? Like, did they leave stuff on the, like, did they take as much food as they could when they abandoned ship? And then they made it a certain distance before they had to go back and get more food? Because remember, the Shackleton's crew did that too.
Yeah.
Maybe. So McClintock's group, they started to suffer the same debility. That's the same thing that happens. They go a certain amount, they get the debility, and then they were more or less satisfied.
Is this like the Bermuda Triangle? What's going on? Why is everybody getting sick in there?
It's rough, it's a rough environment.
It's hard.
But they were pretty much satisfied more or less with what they had found. They'd found more than anybody else, and it paints not a complete picture, but more of a picture than they had. I mean, they found this note, which really kind of...
They got stuck in the ice for too long. They tried to go one way. They tried to go the other way.
Mm-hmm. But the most important thing that they found kind of was the fact that John Franklin died early, which kind of repairs his reputation. He died before all the cannibalism happened. He didn't do any cannibalism himself.
Yeah, if he wasn't there.
Yeah, if he had been there, he definitely would not have done it. Yeah, no way.
Like, no. Stop.
Yeah. My wife wouldn't like this. I'd rather starve to death.
Hey, stop. I don't want that toe that doesn't bend. No.
Hey, those toes are bending. You can't eat them.
So then this is more or less the end of the historical expeditions to figure out what happened, or the end of this kind of era. The next 2 that come happen a few years later. The first one, and there were 2 Americans. Up to this, it had all been English people. So
America.
Charles Francis Hall.
I've been there.
In 1869, he set out. So this was now 25 years later. He had the idea that there could be survivors still living amongst the Inuit. And so he went up in 1869. This was just an idea that he had. But instead, he found more stories further detailing the cannibalism.
Oh no!
But he did.
He confirmed it.
Yeah, dude. Like his first thought is, I don't know. Maybe they found some Inuits and they're living with them.
Maybe one guy was left, and
maybe
some people came across him, and he was like, "Help me!" And they were like, "Yeah, okay." And then he's like, "Can I stay?" And they were like, "Yeah, sure." I don't know.
But so, in addition to more stories about cannibalism, he did also get a story recounting the sight of a ship with smoke coming from it that he determined was in the spring of 1849. And then there was a gangway to the shore and 4 white men's footprints and a dog going away from it.
Andrew, they took your advice. They torched it.
Yeah.
Or it was the heaters, the steam going.
Oh.
I think they torched it.
And so these maybe were like the last survivors who had returned to the ship for some reason. Maybe. I don't know.
That's pretty late,
That's what
right?
I would do, right?
Yeah, so this is the last like possible thing. This is the last thing, and the kind of ironically is that if this story was true, and it probably was, if Ross had made it further, he would have been able to encounter them. The times line up with Ross's rescue expedition.
Oh man,
Okay.
like they just missed each other.
Yeah.
It's tragic.
Yeah, they found one more skeleton, and they actually collected it and they sent it back to England, the bones were entombed in a memorial. Then later,
That's pretty cool.
another American, a guy named Frederick Schwatka.
That
he
sounds
was
German.
probably a German immigrant or the child of German immigrants. He was inspired by Hall, and he also traveled by sledge to King William Island in 1879 to try and retrace their retreat routes. He ended up finding the bones of 4 more skeletons at the boat
All
place.
they're doing is finding bones.
All they're doing is finding bones. He made it back to where the boat was that McClintock had found, and that's where
And
he
he
found
found more bones.
He found more bones. He found an opened grave near where the note was found at Victory Point.
And it had bones in it.
Yeah. No, it didn't, but it was an open grave. There is a few
Like there were
occasions
bones
where,
in it, and somebody dug
yeah.
it up and ate it.
Well, like,
Someone took all the bones. They made a. They
I
made
don't know
a, they
about
they
made
said,
a
these are my
Ate it.
bones. No.
but at this point also, you're dealing with like, it's now 40, 50 years after this happened. I mean, the Inuit are going around this area, and a lot of the times they're just seeing abandoned stuff, and they're like, well, this is something
Like,
that we
sweet.
could repurpose for something that we need.
I mean, yeah, I'm just gonna take this. I mean,
Yeah, I'm just going to take this. It's a difficult life up there. They take what they
that's-
need. Like, they use what they need to use. And
that's Inuit version of thrifting.
yeah, at one point, one of the lifeboats that was recognized by, I don't remember if it was this one or a different one, but it was like disassembled because they needed wood. And it's like, yeah, sure. What are these people using it for? They're all dead, and you need wood to live. So take it.
yeah,
Here
it's
we go.
fine.
Yeah.
And look at all these bones. We could use all these bones.
It's a good
Perfectly
bones.
It's bones right
it's
over
nuts
there.
that there's just like everywhere
There's free
they
bones?
retrace step. It's just a line of bones.
Lines of bones.
What are you gonna do with those
Speaking of bones,
You
They-
gonna eat that?
so speaking of bones, the Inuit led them to. They asked about the place where they had found the last remnants of the expedition, with like the cannibalism and all that, like that we had mentioned earlier, like the camp with all the
Yeah.
dead people strewn about. And they led them to an area that they said was that spot, and they found bones scattered all around. And they buried them and set up a monument, and they named it Starvation Cove. And Starvation Cove remains
God.
right. It's on the Adelaide Peninsula, which is technically mainland Canada. So they did make it to mainland Canada. They did start on their way. They made it about 150 miles from where the ships were abandoned. And
I don't
those
like that
remain.
you just skirted past that name.
It remains the southernmost point where any evidence of the expedition was found.
Starvation Cove.
Yeah,
I feel
fucked
like
up.
a little
rude.
dark,
It's like,
isn't it?
It's-
if your whole
rude.
family dies in a fire, then you make a monument called Burn to Death Manor.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was the 1870s. It was a different time.
Remember these men. Remember their sacrifice.
And also, is it Starvation Cove if they ate each other?
Well, and then they did end up starving to death because, there's only so much meat you can
They
get
ran
off a
out of
person.
bones.
Eventually, you eat if you're just eating all, and then you just die. Because you eat it
Yeah.
all, and then you eat yourself, and then you die. Then you
Yeah.
implode.
Yeah. So
That's
now
what
this
happens.
is pretty much the end of the historical attempts to find out what happened. The Royal Geographic Society concluded that all of these rescue attempts and expeditions had pretty much completed our maps of the area, which is kind of funny. Every couple of years, people going through the area might find more bones or relics, a skeleton here or there, but no more expeditions with the intended purpose of finding out what happened. Shortly after, in 1903 to 1905, our old friend Roald Amundsen became the first
Hey,
person to actually
I know this
traverse the
guy.
Northwest Passage without dying.
That dude's a fucking badass, dude.
Yeah, this is
He
actually
went to the South
before.
Pole.
This was before he went to the South Pole. So
No,
he
he went
was
to the
riding
North Pole, and then he did the South Pole, and then he did the other pole.
the Northwest Passage
it's
never
pretty-
really.
It's pretty nuts to be like, every other person who has attempted this has died,
Yeah,
but not me.
no,
But I'm Roald Amundsen, a.k.a. Roald Amundsen. I'm fucking awesome.
yeah, the Norwegian polar extraordinaire.
I'm from Norway.
So the Northwest Passage never really became a viable commercial route because of all of the everything that we've been talking about.
Turns out the Northwest Passage doesn't exist.
Yeah, it's so badly. Well, no, you can travel it.
But it's not like a nice way.
And there have been a few commercial vessels that have navigated it for whatever reason or another, but the first one was in 1969. And ironically, now it's a more viable shipping lane than ever before because of the ice melting, which sucks.
Thanks, global warming.
Yeah, but the difficulty of navigating the passage then became a big motivator in constructing the Panama Canal, which was finished in 1914. But now we got to go back to the Franklin expedition because some really interesting stuff has happened in the years since in the 20th century. So in the 80s, an archaeologist named Owen Beattie, or I'm not sure if he's an archaeologist, but a researcher named Owen Beattie. He's a professor of anthropology at the University of Alberta. I should have written that down because he wrote the book that I mostly used as my source. But he started getting really interested in the expedition and really wanted to start answering some of the questions. Like, there's still so many mysteries here. Why did 3 people pass before there was really the supplies were in jeopardy? Why did so many of why is this debility thing such a big problem? Was there really cannibalism that killed this expedition? And so they figured that the answers lied in the bones. They wanted to study the bones.
It's in the bones.
It all comes back to the bones,
The answer
baby.
is always in the bones. So I love bones.
So Owen Beattie set out to get answers. And so the first thing that they did was...
bone win. Oh, man. I almost had it.
We're saying your name a lot by saying bones, and you have not chimed in that much. I'm very surprised, honestly.
Yeah, like bones. Let me
Bones.
Bones.
Hey, what does Bo call his bones?
Classic.
He set me up for a boner joke.
I didn't mean to, but I thought I was going to say something else, but that's fine.
All right, answer for me then.
I was going to say bones.
Bones. They were wood. Getting ahead of myself. So the expedition started with surveys at important sites like Booth Point, where they got stories from Inuit about a dead body who was not found by the historical expeditions. The boat place where the body was in the lifeboat.
You missed one.
Yeah, right. The boat place, which is the body in the lifeboat. They just call it the boat place. There's another boat place too. There's 2 boat places, but they recovered some bones and artifacts, including the sole of a shoe, which had screws driven downward through it to help serve as makeshift snow cleats. Sick. Which is also kind of sad in a way. And then they
didn't have snow cleats?
I guess not. Then the bones, so they retrieved and tested the bones, as well as some of the bones turned out to be Inuit bones, which they tested for comparison. So the bones at this site they provided the first real physical evidence for the cannibalism that was talked about. They only found the head, the arms, and the legs. The trunk of the body was completely missing. The skull was forcibly smashed. And
those tasty, tasty ribs.
The bones had cut marks on them in parallel lines, which are very clear butchery marks on the femur. And so this follows a pattern from other cases where people resorted to cannibalism. The torso and organ meats and such were eaten where the body was cut up because it's the best stuff, and it is also kind of like the least human-like stuff. Like you can eat ribs and then pretend that you're eating cow ribs. You can eat kidney meat and be like, oh yeah, this is just beef kidney or whatever in your head.
Is this episode about the Northwest Passage or cannibalism?
There's a lot of...
The 2 are intertwined.
Yes.
And so this is kind of the pattern that happens with various cases where people had to resort to cannibalism. Like this is a big source for kind of like anthropological studies on cannibalism is the plane crash in the Andes, that rugby team that crashed in the Andes. People survived, and they've written about what it's like to have to be in that situation. But so the torso and the organ meats are more abstractable, and they're harder to carry with you. And so those were usually eaten at the butchery site.
They don't keep.
Arms, the arms and legs and the head, they're very human like. You can't trick yourself into thinking that you're eating something else. So, and they're also portable. So if you had to bring food with you, bring the arms and legs and the head, and you can eat them on the go, which is kind of gross.
A little tasty like snack. Okay.
Yeah. And then, so in the future then too, this is what they found in the 80s. Oh. Yeah. Gross. In the future, Beattie continued researching the subject. He's kind of like the guy, title caps. He's the guy on the subject. And so he and Simon Mays published a paper in 2016, which I couldn't read the whole thing, but I read the abstract because I didn't want to pay $15 to read the whole paper. But more bones recovered in the meantime, which has more evidence for cannibalism. Their bones have evidence that they were cooked and cracked open for marrow, and they call this end stage cannibalism. Which is like the cannibalism. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you know.
Yeah. The really important thing that they got from these bones is severely elevated lead levels. 228 parts per million in the bones.
What's the normal amount?
Modern normal amount, 5 to 14 parts per million.
Wow.
And by comparison, the Inuit bones that they got were 22 to 36 parts per million. So the thing about the lead content in the bones, though, is that bones indicate long-term lead exposure. This could be lead from previous exposure to lead, and as I'll talk about in a second. It was really easy to get lead in your bones in this era. The only way to know if the lead poisoning was related to the expedition was to check the hair. In short-term exposure to lead, it gets deposited in your hair.
Mm.
So they petitioned the Canadian government to get permits to exhume the bodies at Beattie Island and get a better idea of what the deal was with these elevated lead levels.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And so it took a couple of years to get the permits, but in 1984, they were able to get started and exhumed the body of John Torrington because he was the first one to die. So they figured he should be the first one that they dig up. And so they did. This was done, and then they did John Hartnell, and then they did William Brain. And so this was done very delicately over the course of 2 non-consecutive years. They did Torrington's in 1984, and then after Torrington's, they dug up Hartnell, but didn't have time to study him, so they put him back in the ground, then dug him back up, and Brain in 1986.
Didn't have time, so there's put him back in there.
Yeah, pretty much.
Oops.
They wanted to survey and make sure that he was that it was all in good condition and see what they were going to be dealing with.
Just to confirm he's dead. That's all.
Yeah. Oh, he's dead. Oh, good to know. So they were buried like I said, Beattie Island was pretty much all gravel. And so they were buried under gravel in permafrost. And this was very difficult. It took 18 hours to dig up the gravel and then even longer to get through the permafrost. And what they did was they heated up water in camp stoves and poured it in to help melt it. But thankfully it was the Arctic summer, and the Arctic summer means more or less constant daylight. So they just kind of had dudes going in shift and were able to get it all done.
That's so hard because you have to be very careful that you don't do it too much because then you can ruin what's underneath.
Yeah, exactly. And so this is what Torrington's gravestone looked like, just so you can see it. But once they got in, they found the coffin, which had a wrought iron plaque attached to it. They were able to get the top of the coffin off and found John Torrington, who was extraordinarily well preserved. It looked like he died only very recently because his body had been in permafrost this entire time.
That's gross.
Yeah. And I'll just post picture here.
Oh.
So he's wearing
Oh,
blue
don't send
striped
that.
shirt with
Jesus,
mother of
I don't
pearl
wanna see
buttons.
Ah,
He is wrapped in a blue
Come on,
wool
man.
blanket.
And you got more bones.
sending pictures of dead people without even. Oh, come on, man! You gotta give us.
Yeah, you
No.
gotta warn us.
Okay,
Holy shit!
sorry. Yeah, so I assume you don't want to see the other two then.
Not looking at that. Let me guess.
Well,
They're dead.
Well, yeah, but they're really well
Cool.
preserved.
That's nice to know.
Send 'em.
Okay.
I'll look.
Next slide, please.
I'll look. I'll look.
So John Torrington, buried in a blue striped shirt, mother of pearl buttons, wrapped in a blue wool blanket, and laid on a bed of wood shavings. His hands were really well preserved, like the rest of them, and they noted that they were smooth, which indicated that he'd been sick and unable to work for quite some time before he died. But his fingernails were clean, and he'd been given a haircut. He was autopsied, and samples were taken for further lab analysis before he was reburied. Initial findings for the autopsy showed that he had these blackened lungs, which were very distressing. So
Does scurvy do that?
I'll get into that in a second. I'm gonna present all the excavations and then go over the autopsy results. That's how it's organized.
And then Bo will do it first, though, to tell you exactly how he died.
Mm-hmm. Then they exhumed John Hartnell's body, and John Hartnell, who was the second man who died, he was 25 years old, but his coffin lid and shirt were damaged. And at first they were confused, but then they found some records from the initial expeditions that indicated that this grave was actually dug up by them in 1850. They damaged the coffin lid and his shirt, which is a little rude. But he was wearing a similar shirt to Torrington, but it was a little more expensive. The stripes were woven rather than printed. But the saddest detail of all this, and this is just the saddest thing, is that the shirt had an embroidery on it that said 1844 TH. Remember, his name is John Hartnell. What do you think TH means, though?
Hartnell.
Yeah, his younger brother was named Thomas Hartnell, and he was also on the expedition.
So he stole his shirt and that he killed him?
Yes, he stole his shirt, then he killed him. No,
Thomas was like, fuck you for stealing my shirt.
I was more thinking about a really sad scene where a man is burying his older brother and decides to give him his shirt in the grave.
His older brother goes, I'm kind of cold. You're not going to use this no more. Don't mind if I do.
Ooh. Yeah, swapped shirts, took the warmer shirt.
That's really sad. That is really sad.
Yeah. Anyway, this is what his face looked like.
Stop it. Jesus Christ.
Looks like a man who could use a shirt.
Oh my God. Be happy this is an audio podcast today. Holy fuck. He's sending pictures of dead people.
No, if you notice that one of his eyes is a little bit in worse condition than the other.
I'm not looking at anything.
But that's damage from when the body was exposed. It's kind of like when we talked about with Ötzi, when these bodies are in these situations for as long as they are, taking them out of that situation can cause almost kind of rapid decomposition, which is why they exhumed the bodies and autopsied them as quickly as possible and put them back into the ground.
Oh wow, yeah. Don't got icy sprays like Ötzi has in his fancy museum.
Yeah, and so in 1986 expedition, like the 1986 trip out there, they had brought an X-ray machine as well.
Mark them as spoilers, sec, on Discord.
Okay, and so they were able to bring an X-ray machine with them this time, and they tested it out by X-raying a random polar bear bone that they found, which may have been from the.
I'm deleting the pictures in our chat, by the way,
so you don't have to keep looking.
I don't look at those like it's staring at me in my left screen, and I hate it.
I think that working in archaeology for as long as I have just ruined me when it comes to what's socially acceptable.
I mean,
when it comes to images
as long as I have, if you just give me a heads up. I just said, and here's what he looked like. And I was like, that.
All right, I sent one.
Here's
you
a monster.
I'm going to send another. Okay, I'll send. And so they had an X-ray machine. They were able to X-ray these next two bodies. And then they autopsied him. But the crazy thing is that once they got his clothes off to autopsy him, they found that he had already been autopsied by the ship's surgeon before he was buried. And the curious thing about it is that normally when you do an autopsy, you do a Y cut. So you have like a Y going down the chest and then a straight line going down the belly. But
Yeah.
they did it the opposite way. They had the arms of the Y in the belly and then the straight line going up to the chest.
What? That seems like it wouldn't be great.
Yeah, maybe it was just the way that they did it back in the day. I don't really know. But it was quickly done, just a cursory autopsy that the ship's surgeon had done. Like the organs were just thrown back in, the sternum was upside down. But I mean, I guess it really doesn't matter as a dead guy. Then finally they exhumed brain, the last one. And I'm sending a picture, but I'm marking it as a spoiler, so you don't have to look at it, Andrew.
Thank you.
The plaque on his coffin was copper. Unlike the iron of the previous, I don't know if that means anything. Maybe it could be that they were out of iron. But he had a bright red kerchief over his face, and when they removed it, they revealed a much less well preserved than the previous. It was really apparent pretty immediately that he hadn't been buried as quickly as the other two. And his teeth were just horrendous. He looked emaciated, and he was only 88 pounds, and further examination of his body revealed that his body had been kept on the ship long enough to have been gnawed on by rats, which is gross. Then he was autopsied and reburied. So what are the autopsy results?
Bo?
Yeah, Bo. What are the
How did John Torrington kick the old bucket?
So it was aggressive disease from the previous one of debility, where his toes are always straight, but it crept up to his fingers, so he couldn't bend his fingers no more, nor his toes.
I heard he also couldn't move his head or his shoulders or his knees.
Well, that's when the cold took him over.
Yeah, so it was his head, shoulders, knees, and toes disease.
Living in a constant hell of straight fingers and straight toes, he did what any man could do and just jumped in the snow and let him be. He's like, I'm going to match my whole body, freeze me like this. And he did. And that's how he died.
So Zach said black lung. I just thought that he was working with Derek Zoolander in the mine.
Well, so this is actually kind of literally what it was. The blackened lungs were caused by coal smoke inhalation. They call it anthracosis. And this is, it's black lung. And it makes sense because he was the lead stoker. He was the guy who was in charge of the
So he's just breathing it every day, all day.
Engines. Yeah.
That's like when we play Party Animals, that's Ash's job.
Oh yeah, throwing the train.
Yeah, but I throw the coal. I throw the coal from a distance.
See, there's a game called Party Animals. I'm filling everybody in. This game called Party Animals, where you're a bunch of animals and we're on a train, and it's a 4-player game. And me and Bo go to the other train because there's 2 trains and they're racing each other. And you have to throw coal in there. Me and Bo go to the other train to cause a ruckus, and Ash throws the coal in there. So this would happen to Ash, I guess, or Ash's character.
And we're all just like cowboys.
And we're all just like cowboys.
The lungs were also adhered to the chest wall and had fluid inside, which is indicative of lung disease. So he probably died of pneumonia. But the crazy thing is the lead content in his bones was severely elevated. It was 110 to 151 parts per million, depending on the bone. But the hair levels were holy shit levels of elevated, 600 parts per million.
Oh my God.
Especially indicating that his lead exposure had been elevated throughout more or less the entire expedition. And then it got as the hair got younger, there was less of it, probably because he was eating less.
This has to be something that was like from before, though, right? Like, was he always the guy who did the coal?
Yeah,
before even this expedition.
Yeah, you don't get that much black lung just by one expedition as the lead stoker, and you don't get to lead stoker on your first time stoking either. So this guy's been a stoker for a while.
He has to be an apprentice.
Yeah,
a Padawan stoker.
Hartnell's X-rays, he had revealed that he had degenerative bone changes in his left shoulder and elbow, a compression fracture in his neck vertebrae, which was not fatal, but he had evidence of osteomyelitis in his right foot. His hair lead levels were 138 to 313 parts per million, but he died from malnutrition and zinc deficiency. I don't know what zinc deficiency is, but he also had pneumonia.
And his whole body hurt all the time, probably. Oh my God.
Yeah, all the time. Then lastly, William Brain, his main issue was he had a collapsed vertebra, which is something that happens when you have tuberculosis. That's something that happens with tuberculosis. And his hair levels were 145 to 280 parts per million. So all these guys had hella lead in their hair, which means that they were introduced to large sources of lead at some point in this expedition.
Extremely recently.
So we have to talk about lead. Now we have to talk about lead.
They all had lead poisoning.
Yeah. So the Victorian era was lousy with lead.
Everyone was handling lead all the time. There was lead in the wallpaper.
Everyone has lead poisoning. And if you, any bones from this period will indicate large amounts of lead. And so this was not, like, if you compare it, it's not particularly surprising that they all had lead poisoning.
And their bones especially.
In their bones, yeah. This was from before they left. What is really remarkable is how high the lead exposure in their hair is. And so they could,
because you would expect that it would be extremely low, because they're like, well, maybe not extremely low, but like pretty low, because they're trying to eat fresher food. They're like out in the fresh air, you know? Yeah.
And the lead poisoning was known to be a thing. But it wasn't like it was, they weren't like most Victorian diseases. They knew that it existed, but they didn't really know why or how, and they didn't do anything about it. And so
you're just weak-willed.
Potters
just like, oh, that sucks. Let's see you
Potters
later.
Gross.
Yeah. So potters were exposed to a lot of lead because of lead in pottery glazes. Painters were exposed to a lot of lead because of lead in paint, and plumbers were exposed to a lot of lead because of lead in pipes. And so lead poisoning was seen as like a flu that was affected plumbers and painters and potters. They didn't call it lead poisoning. They just thought of it as a disease that these professions were susceptible to. Kind of like the whole Mad Hatter thing. Because
people who do that are working class, and working class people are worse than us.
Yeah. So hatters were known to go mad because mercury was used as an agent to help stiffen the felt in the hats. And so they were just like, hatters go crazy, but
people
nobody was
who
like,
make
maybe
hats
it's because
are
of the
crazy.
mercury. So it was just seen as like an unavoidable thing about these professions, and nobody cared about workers' rights anyway. On the ship, it's likely that the sailors would have gotten exposure to lead from just the lead pipes on the ship. But there was another, more insidious source of lead. And for that, we have to go back to the tinned food. So canning food was a pretty new thing, like I mentioned.
The cans!
Don't you dare talk about bad about the cans, you motherfucker.
I'm going to talk bad about the cans. So canning food had been developed in the early 1800s, and the process had only been patented for about a decade when the Franklin expedition was outfitted. The Navy was strongly believing that the tinned food was a magic bullet against malnutrition and scurvy on these long expeditions. But do you kind of remember how every expedition has been suffering from debility? So it turns out that the initial process for making these tins of food, it involves soldering the cans together before sealing them. And they used lead tin solder at the time. An analysis of the tins found at the various Franklin sites shows that they used a ton of solder. Not only there's just drippy solder lines on both sides of the can, the inside, the outside, and the inside.
They had super mega extra lead poisoning.
The lead was going into the food in the tins. And sailors some sailors at the time who wrote about eating tinned food would talk about seeing blobs of solder floating in their food and like fishing it out. So the sailors being exposed to lead from this source, and this is also backed up because you can fingerprint lead. You can do isotope analysis on the lead in the bones in the hair. And based on the isotope ratios of the lead in the sailors in like Torrington and Hartnell's and Brain's hair, it's from the same isotopic source as the lead in the tins that they studied, that they found at the grave site.
How fucking Jesus.
So my understanding of lead poisoning
you talked about forensic files earlier with the narrator being the same, but that's some real forensic file shit.
Yeah. So my understanding of lead.
Did everything just taste like metal?
Well, lead is actually kind of sweet. This is why why children would eat paint chips. This is why you especially have to be careful about lead paint in houses with children in them, because lead is kind of sweet tasting, and like lead paint chips apparently taste good. I've never eaten them, but that's why you have to worry about kids eating them. Yeah,
you know what? I'll do it. I'll do it.
Take one for the team.
You do it. Let us know.
Yeah, give me some lead chips.
If anybody would on this podcast, Bo would be the perfect guy to do it.
Now, so lead poisoning to fatality is a long-term process. The lead has to be in your system for a long time, or you need to be exposed to just obscene, absurd amounts of lead. And this isn't enough lead for that.
It kind of was like just by being in Victorian society, but
yeah. And so this amount of exposure that they are getting, though, does have immediate effects, and that would be expressed by the body in the form of fatigue, sluggishness, cognitive deficiencies, anemia, hypertension, neuropathy, and a weakened immune system.
And straight motherfucking toes.
Yeah. Now, soldiers in the Navy in other areas of the world were also eating the tin food and getting the lead exposure, and they were not all dying. And so researchers have used this fact that other sailor skeletons from the 1840s do have comparably high lead levels. It was just, but a lot of these bones come from sailors that were like stationed in the Caribbean, whereas these guys are in the Arctic. So I think this is one of the major compounding factors. So the Arctic environment, it's cold, it's wet all the time. It's horrible for your body and your immune system already. So somebody who's weakened by lead poisoning might be fine stationed in the Caribbean, but the harsh environment of the Arctic, which is already making your body mad all the time, is going to make those symptoms so much worse. And I think that this is part of the reason why you see like some weird decision making in like the stuff that they brought on the boats.
Their brains were all fucked up. Yeah, and in the Caribbean, you theoretically can get fish or some other source. You're not eating as much of the tinned food, I would imagine.
Yeah. This is also a thought as to why 9 officers died in that 1 year, is because so many officers were dying in comparison to the sailors, because the officers were eating higher quality food, aka the tinned food, versus like, the hardtack crackers and stuff like this. Now there's a second compounding factor, and this one's a little bit more insidious. Examination of the tins. Further examination showed that not only...
What else did these fuckers do?
So not only was the solder line big and drippy, it was also a lot of them had incomplete seams and had bulges on the ends.
Oh, they're getting botulism.
So you get botulism is the main reason why you shouldn't eat from dented or bulging cans. It means that the seal
Who was
is
making
incomplete.
these cans?
So this was a guy named Stephen Goldner.
Stephen.
He had a cannery. He was contracted by the Navy. He was probably the lowest bidder. And so he had supplied a small amount by the deadline, not the full order, and basically had to rush to make up the rest of the order by the time the ships left. And so clearly, by rushing the order of tinned food, he did a bunch of his company did all this sloppy soldering, and this resulted in probably a fair amount of food spoilage. So the 8,000 tins of
soldering
food,
is a really good metal band name.
It's pretty good. So the 8,000 tins that they had to last them 2-3 years was probably a lot less food. And so while they may have avoided the spoiled food early on, I'm sure as the amount of food that they had dwindled, they resorted to eating the spoiled food, and then their situation just got worse.
And then it's like, on top of the lead poisoning, now you have botulism.
Yeah.
Okay, forgive me if botulism, is it just food poisoning?
It's extra turbo super bad food poisoning.
Okay. Food poisoning plus. Yeah,
it's like also like a paralytic.
It's a toxin that grows in like spoiled it's made by a specific bacteria, and the bacteria excretes this toxin called botulism.
Okay.
Real bad for you.
It attacks the body's nerves and causes difficulty breathing, muscle paralysis, and death. And this is actually the muscle paralysis is don't get Botox, because Botox is botulism toxin.
Little teeny tiny doses of botulism.
Yeah, little teeny tiny directed doses of botulism, which paralyzes the muscles in your face and makes you tighter.
Wow.
Yeah.
I hate that.
Or you could just eat spoiled canned food. So like many of the other stories here, this is also backed up by Inuit oral history, in that at some point they had gotten hold of some of these tinned foods and they tried them for themselves and they were immediately sick. Goldner also supplied Ross's rescue expedition, mainly, I think, because the Navy saw no complaints about the original quality of the food, because everyone who ate from that original order died in the Arctic. But Ross's group, and this is a little detail I left out from earlier, they wrote a lot of complaints about the quality of the food in their diaries. And Ross himself got so sick that it took him 6 months to recover after returning. But
Jesus.
the Navy effectively suppressed them and said that the reason why they got so sick was scurvy, even though Ross himself said that there was no scurvy. It was because they had so much spoiled food. And I don't know what the reason
shitting
behind
myself,
this is.
bro.
Yeah, probably the Navy not wanting to save face and not admit that they got the food from a shitty supplier. I don't know.
That's fucked up.
Yeah. So
It's like we have like a third of as much food and it all tastes like metal. This is garbage.
yeah, pretty much.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's kind of what happened. And that's the more of a story of how to piece together the story of a lost expedition. So the story, to recap as it went, kind of from all the stuff that the various expeditions have put together, a recap of the general chronology of the expedition. So they entered this area around July 1845. By the winter, they made it to Beattie Island, where they sent up the winter camp. In early January, John Torrington and John Hartnell die from pneumonia and tuberculosis. And as the first to die, they're given proper burials in the gravel and the permafrost at Beattie Island. We know that they were in the area until April, but they may have not gotten very far when Brain died, because his body was stored on the ship long enough to have been gnawed by rats. So maybe they had left and came back to add him to the graveyard. Once winter's out, they start south and sail down to King William Island. Now, King William Island at the time, it was believed to have been connected to the land on the east. They thought that it was a peninsula. And so they sailed around it to the west and were caught in the ice in September 1846.
Oh, that sucks.
One thing that people know now is that that area to the west of King William Island is fed by a channel which constantly deposits pack ice right into that area. But if they had gone around to the east side of the island, it's usually clear and they would have been able to make it through. And that's kind of their main mistake, but that they didn't know was a mistake at the time, as far as they knew it was the right way to go.
That's like the whale ship guys. They're like, oh, we shouldn't go to this island. There's cannibals there. And they're like, yeah, there's a whole like
trading post.
Town,
it totally would have been
trading
fine.
Post. Mm-hmm. You would have been cool.
Yeah.
But this time they weren't racist. They were just made a bad decision.
They were just operating on poor information. And so in September, they get stuck in the ice. They spend the winter there, hoping to be able to leave the next summer. But in May, they leave their update letter in the cairn, hoping that they'll be on their way soon. Shortly after, John Franklin dies in June. The ice never thaws out, and they're forced to winter again in the same spot. In April 1848, they've spent a year and 7 months frozen in the same spot in the ice. So they decide to abandon ship and update the note in the cairn, and then they set off to Back River. Now, at this point, they're pretty close to the end of the stored provisions, and that's assuming that they were all able to be eaten. So by this point, they're definitely out of food. And it's probably why they abandoned ship, is because they would be hoping that they'd be able to either trade with the Inuit for food or find some seals or something that they could eat. And they're pretty much at the 3-year mark from leaving at this point. At some point after this, the group splintered as they dragged the sledges behind them, the boats and the sledges. Some of them may have gone back to the ships. Others went to, continued going south. Others encountered the Inuit and tried to get them to give them food. And as time went on, as they're making their death march to Back River, people began starving to death. Those who died were butchered, and they, brought what they could with them. And then the remaining men pushed on southward until they made it to what is now called Starvation Cove, where they ran out of energy, couldn't go any further.
They were starving.
There may have been other people who were found. I mean, there is everyone was found at Starvation Cove. There is the people who went back to the ship, so we don't know what that story is. That could be anything. There's still a lot of mysteries left here. But that's what happened.
Yikes.
Yeah. Now a quick coda to all of this is that very recently, and in 2014, a group of researchers found the wreck of the HMS Erebus. And then in 2016, they found the Terror as well. These were expeditions from Parks Canada. They were going out for several summers to try and find the ships. There was a researcher named Louis Kamakak, who is Inuit, and he spent 30 years studying it. He was along with Owen Beattie, and his specialty was collecting oral history related to the ships, and particularly the places where they were last seen. And he was able to pinpoint the area where they were last seen. And where the ships were crushed by the ice and sank, and the other one which remained floating. And they pretty much tracked it down. They used a really cool sub with a little drone with a sonar beacon in it that could scan a square mile per hour, called the Arctic Explorer.
Cute.
And they ended up finding them that way. And
I love a little drone that helps you find stuff.
Yeah. And so not a lot has been published on what was found. And by that, I can't really blame them. I mean, it's been 10 years, but COVID happened. And with a lot of these big sites, especially like these sorts of shipwrecks, it takes a long time to get enough done. And I'm sure that they probably want to have a complete picture of it before they start publishing things. So I'm looking forward to reading whatever comes out when they've completed their research.
Did they dig it up or what?
No, they're studying it mostly using the sonar. They've redone like 3D reconstructions. They're sending submersibles down. And I believe they're also scubaing down with like dry suits.
Get that thing up and get it running.
I feel like you can't, because once you lift it up, it all falls apart. Yeah.
Hey, now, it's 2024. We have 3D printers.
We can get it done.
Well, that's why they're scanning it.
Lazy scientists strike again in whatever.
They're scanning it so that you can make a 3D print out of it and be like, this is what it looks like.
We can make this work.
Yeah. And the last,
get some YouTubers out there, and like get Mark Rober out there. He'll take care of it.
Then finally, based on the position of the ships, they were able to find that the last place that the ships made it to was closing the gap. They finished the Northwest Passage at some point. They didn't make it back out, but they did complete their mission at some point.
Well, I mean, kind of, but sure.
They just didn't extract.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you know what point that is?
I mean, not the like coordinates, but
what are the exact coordinates? Latitude, longitude, motherfucker. Let's go.
It was in the Simpsons Strait.
You always have to get a Simpsons reference in there.
It's what it's called. I'm not even joking.
No, I don't believe you.
Here's a kind of a map of.
He sent a picture in the chat that wasn't a dead person. Thank you for that.
Now that I've kind of told the whole story and there's no spoilers left, this is a map.
Okay, I pulled the map up at the beginning and I made sure to close it right when you started talking because I didn't want to spoil myself with where these places were. So
yeah. So
sure
what was?
Should we post this on the Instagram? Is this a spoiler?
I mean, I tried to make it so that you could follow the story without a map. How did it work? Do you think they need a map?
I don't think this would spoil the whole bones part.
Okay. So what was your favorite part? The part where everyone died?
I'll go first. But I think mine and Andrew's answer are going to be similar. My favorite part was the dead bodies. I think that was Andrew's too.
When you posted the creepy dead bodies in the chat, the photos of them were taken directly above their face, so it looks like their dead eyes are staring into the camera. That's really going to make me sleep well tonight. But also the fact that every single time they went looking for them, they were like, oh, who knows? Maybe they'll live with an Inuit tribe. And they're like, oh my God, there's more bones?
Mm-hmm.
Crazy.
Yeah, 130 people's worth of bones.
Yeah, I don't think that's my favorite part. I think it's my least favorite part is that just Everyone died.
This story was kind of a bummer through and through.
It
started so high. Yeah.
I know. Like, you're like, they're going to find this bastard dog.
They're so well equipped. They've got the best boats.
Are going to be fucking amazing.
It's going to pop off.
Let's do this. Yeah.
Dude, it's not like the whale ship one where they're like, oh, yeah, here's a bunch of assholes. And then they all die. And we're like, sweet. This is like, here's a bunch of people who are actually trying to accomplish something. And they die. It's like, okay.
I was capturing the vibe of the era.
Yeah, it's, that was rough.
It's a really intriguing story, though. And it's kind of my favorite kind of like story for this sort of thing, where it's also about reconstructing what happened through these sorts of like findings that they get over the years.
Yeah, my legitimate
it's like a murder mystery.
Favorite thing was that it came down to the bones, because it always does.
The bones.
Yeah, it was almost like an episode of Forensic Files.
It was.
The bones.
So I think that that's pretty neat.
Bones.
It's the bones.
Interesting.
It's in the bones.
Yeah. So if you're interested
it's
in
the
story,
bones and it's in the cans.
Particularly
it's in the bones and it's in the garbage.
If any of the listeners are interested in the process of studying the bones, it's really detailed really well in this Frozen in Time book, because Owen Beattie is the guy who wrote the book. The second half of the book is all about the mummies and the studies and everything like that. And it's all really, really top-notch stuff. It's really interesting. I really enjoyed reading this book. There's a lot of details that I had to leave out, and I already included a lot of details. So like, kind of nuts stuff.
Yeah. And also, if you want to learn more about this, just send me a message on Instagram and I'll send you Zach's phone number, and you could text him at 3 a.m. asking him more.
Then the documentaries are also really great. The most recent one that I watched, where do you get to your Prime Video viewing history so I can remember what this is called? Arctic Ghost Ship. Arctic Ghost Ship is the name of the 2014 one. This is about this is Nova. It's about the process of discovering the Erebus. And so that one's really interesting. It's really great, and I enjoyed watching it a lot. And then the other two that I recommend are the how do you get to your YouTube history? I should.
Oh my god.
My next podcast is going to be on my next podcast is going to be on how to access your own history at different viewing apps, Netflix or Hulu.
Buried in Ice. Buried in Ice is the one from 1988, and so that one is PBS documentarians following Owen Beattie while they're digging up, exhuming the mummies, and so it's got a lot of really great shots of all the mummies.
Oh, I love when the dude who found them is in the documentary. Those are always fun.
It's there while they're doing it. It's got a nice needle drop when they play the Stan Rogers Northwest Passage song. It's also got, it's kind of funny, they had to bring a bear dog with them, like a dog that would alert them of polar bears coming by. And so there's a lot of parts where they're like talking about like what they found, and like there's an important dog, like there's a like, oh, we found this cool thing about the skeleton, or they're like talking about like, oh, it's so sad that, you know, this guy, you know, what did he go through in his last days? And then in the background, there's just a husky doing like making husky noises. And then the middle one and that's the one that's narrated by the guy who narrates Forensic Files. So that's really great too. And the middle one is from 2002 or 2003. And it is a History Channel one called Arctic Tomb. And that one has a lot of fun reenactments in it. It's got like a guy who plays Franklin, and like they've got like these ships that they're like sailing around on. And that one's fun. And that one's from when the History Channel was still like trying to be the History Channel. So that's really good as well. So recommendations if you want to learn more. Yeah. All right. So that's it. Yeah.
Thanks everyone for listening. That took us in. I'll take us out. Thanks everyone for listening. I hope you liked that, I hope you liked learning about the process of solving a historical mystery. Super interesting. Thank you, Zach, for weaving such an intricate tale for us. If you like that episode, you can listen to other episodes we have. We're found where you find podcasts. Get to know podcast on Instagram and everywhere else. So yeah, thank you so much for listening. Wherever you are, whenever you are, have a great time. Whatever it is that you're doing. Unless it's
don't get botulism.
Yeah.
No, don't get botulism.
Bulging cans, don't eat them. And that's the message of this podcast. Okay, bye everyone.
See you next week.
Bye.
Bye. Goodbye. Ash and Zach are super smart. They went to college and learned a bunch of stuff. And Bo and Andrew didn't go to college and were able to sidestep mountains of unnecessary debt. What happens when you put them together and you try to make them learn? Well, grab your friends. Let's listen together on Get Dumped On an Info Dump Podcast.
Bye.
Bye.